First, on BBC One, the latest news at 9 o'clock with Michael Burke.
Afghan guerrillas have been ordered to take Kabul. The government is still hanging on in the capital, hoping that negotiations will avert a bloodbath. And fighting flares across Bosnia. The UN envoy says the republic faces disaster. Good evening. Mujahideen fighters are closing in on the Afghan capital Kabul, and the leader of one of the fundamentalist groups tonight ordered his men to take the city. During the day, a government minister slipped out of Kabul for talks with another rebel commander, hoping to thwart the fundamentalists and avoid a bloody battle for the capital. President Najibullah was deposed yesterday. Kabul is now ruled by a coalition of government ministers and generals who are trying to arrange a deal with the more moderate rebel groups.
Government troops are preparing for a final showdown. They control the streets of the capital, but Mujahideen rebels surround the city and are tightening their stranglehold. The overthrow of President Najibullah has sparked a scramble for power. He's under arrest. It's not clear where he's being held. Thousands of people here have fled, fearing a bloodbath.
Within the last few minutes, there's been quite a few APCs, armoured personnel carriers, hurtling around the city. There's been some artillery going out, and even a chap got on top of one of the buildings and was shouting, "Long live the Mujahideen."
At a news conference today, Afghanistan's foreign minister said the government was prepared to stand aside, either today or tomorrow. He then left for a meeting with the rebel leader Ahmed Shah Massoud, who's denied his forces are beginning to splinter and fight amongst themselves. His coalition is 20 miles north of the capital and is heavily armed. Already there in the southern suburbs is the rebel faction led by Gulbuddin Hekmatyar. He's ordered his troops to take the city tonight. In London, Ahmed Massoud's brother said the rebels now held all the cards and the government had few options.
They will give up. We hope they will before anything, any sort of violence or any sort of misunderstanding arise from other quarter, which will, as I said, jeopardize the whole situation.
In New York, the United Nations met in emergency session. Their plans to end 14 years of civil war have been thrown into total confusion. The Security Council has appealed to all parties to allow more time for their proposals to take effect, but the prospect of further bloodshed is causing alarm.
It's very worrying and very sad and very tragic. We have 3 million refugees. I'm sure that after this there will be even more coming in as a result of this fighting.
President Najibullah had been due to stand down by the end of the month. The UN plan was to set up an interim government. Leaders of the present Afghan regime are still hopeful his departure will now improve their chances of success.
This will help the acceleration of the political solution of the situation in Afghanistan, because Najibullah was someone supporting peace in words, but indeed in action he have always been against it.
But as the UN talk of political outcomes, the rebels in the south look like taking the city and negotiating afterwards. Tonight a curfew is in place. It's hoped an attack won't happen, but the momentum looks too great to stop.
The United Nations Special Envoy Cyrus Vance has warned that the former Yugoslav Republic of Bosnia-Herzegovina faces disaster unless rival ethnic groups stop fighting. There were intense clashes overnight in the capital, Sarajevo. Firing started just hours after Mr. Vance left the city. And the town of Fojar has been flattened. The local Muslim population has been driven out by Serbian fighters.
This afternoon, after days of fighting, a part of this mixed town south of Sarajevo was in flames. Serbs had been battling Muslims and were, it was said, cleaning out the last pockets of resistance. The troops advancing were local Serbs of the Territorial Defense Force. Their commander put the death toll at about 100. This was the most destructive fighting we have seen yet in 2 weeks of war in Bosnia. Till now, the two sides here have lacked the heavy weapons to do this kind of damage to each other. The destruction was on an almost Croatian scale. The Muslims were besieged and help could not be got to them. Foča fell on one of the quieter days of the war. A pattern is established of Serbian advance and Muslim retreat, and the Muslims in the capital Sarajevo took advantage of a lull in the fighting to bury some of their dead. These were 3 Green Berets, members of the elite force intended to defend the new republic. The grim returns are not yet all in, but the total of dead, Serbs, Croats and Muslims, certainly runs into the hundreds. The war in Bosnia is fulfilling the direst predictions. Martin Bell, BBC News, Sarajevo.
A British lawyer representing the 2 Libyans accused of the Lockerbie bombing says it's unlikely they would agree to stand trial in the West. He was responding to reports from Tripoli that the pair might agree to a hearing in Scotland or in the United States.
They will have to be persuaded that they would get a fair trial in Scotland or in America. And while I'm not going to say that that is not possible, I'm going to say that it's extremely difficult to persuade them that in light of all the evidence of prejudice against them in both those countries, that it will be difficult for them to get a fair trial.
When I spoke to the 2 men's Libyan lawyer, Ibrahim Lagwell, today, he emphasized that the position had not changed, and that his main concern was that a fair trial in Scotland or America would be difficult because of prejudicial pre-trial publicity. However, he indicated that the possibility did remain of the men surrendering themselves, subject to certain procedural conditions, so the door hasn't yet been closed completely. Libya has added 3 more countries' diplomats to the list of those ordered to reduce their missions in Tripoli: Spain, Brazil and Hungary, but there's no indication as to when they'll have to leave. Meanwhile, the announcement by Russia that 3,000 of its citizens will be going is the first large-scale evacuation of foreign workers from Libya. Kate Adey, BBC News, Tripoli.
Police in Leicestershire have tonight arrested a man and a woman in the hunt for the killers of an army recruiting sergeant in Derby. The man, who is 35, and the woman, who is 29, were held at Saltby and taken to Melton Mowbray for questioning. Some of the police were armed. On Guernsey, an Irish woman hotel worker is still being questioned about the death of Sergeant Newman. Police say she's a former girlfriend of Joseph McGee, one of the suspected terrorists Derbyshire police are looking for. 4 other Irish hotel workers interviewed earlier have now been released. The leader of the Ulster Unionist Party, James Molyneux, has predicted that the province's cross-party talks will resume before the end of the month. Today, as a bomb exploded outside a Belfast bank without causing any injuries, Mr Molyneux said he'd been assured by the new Northern Ireland Secretary, Sir Patrick Mayhew, that the dialogue would restart this month. Sir Patrick, visiting Belfast with his junior minister, Michael Mates, said the talks must continue.
Continuity is the name of the game. I'm extremely grateful for the fact that all 4 constitutional parties have indicated their willingness and indeed enthusiasm for continuing the talks. That is where continuity comes in.
Supporters of Home Rule in Scotland have appealed to the Prime Minister to hold a referendum on devolution. Leaders of the Scottish Constitutional Convention, which includes politicians, church leaders and trade unionists, say the wording of the referendum could be settled by consultation.
Outside Edinburgh's Crown Office, frustrated Home Rulers are continuing a 24-hour vigil. They've been there since election day, and they say they'll stay until the government agrees to hold a referendum on Scotland's future. Meanwhile, in Glasgow, members of the Constitutional Convention, who include Labour and the Liberal Democrats, met to discuss the issue, aware that the pre-election blueprint they drew up for a devolved parliament is now redundant. Afterwards, the executive announced that, like the nationalists, it would now campaign for a multi-option referendum.
We are in a new and changed situation in which we need the broadest possible unity to achieve that demand for a referendum in order that the democratic will of the Scottish people shall not be denied.
The convention's executive says it hopes to exploit what they feel is a new, more sympathetic attitude from the government towards change.
What we've got to do is build public opinion. We've got to build constructively. We've got to put pressure on the government using, if I may say so, the weapons that they themselves have provided. Remember Mr Lang's press conference after the general election in which he talked about the possibility of a referendum and a place for a referendum. And we build and take it forward in that way.
But the Scottish Secretary is unlikely to agree to a referendum examining preferences for independence, devolution and the status quo. That issue, he will argue, was settled at the election. The Convention's decision does provide the common ground around which those still seeking change expect to unite to try to force a referendum. Faced, however, by a government with a fresh UK mandate for no change, that may represent a triumph of hope over experience.
Police hunting the killer of a 4-year-old Plymouth boy have doubled the number of detectives working on the case and have warned parents to be extra vigilant. Matthew Robinson was sexually assaulted and strangled in his bed 2 days ago while his 9-year-old brother slept in the same room. The boy's parents own a lodging house and police are trying to track down former tenants.
The murder investigation is being centred on the lodging house in the dockyard area of Plymouth, where Matthew was found dead by his brother in the bunk bed they shared. The house is used by some tenants on social security who've had difficulty finding accommodation, and the police said there's every chance that Matthew knew his killer, as tenants did sleep in rooms on the same floor as the boy's unlocked bedroom. Given the very brutal nature of the attack, the police have called for extra vigilance, especially as thousands of tourists are now holidaying in the southwest.
One doesn't want to alarm holiday people going on holiday, but it's just that we've all got to be aware that there has been a very nasty crime in this city, and the priority obviously is to identify the suspect or the offender in this case, and that it may well be very localised. The answer may be local. Who can tell until the inquiry continues?
Some tenants in the house have already been interviewed, but the police say so far they have no suspect. The difficulty they face now is tracing all those who have lodged or stayed here in recent months, a number that is not yet clear.
Scientists believe they've made an important breakthrough in the treatment and prevention of cervical cancer. Researchers at the Imperial Cancer Research Fund say they've developed a technique which helps them pinpoint those women most at risk.
Each year, about 250,000 women have a smear test result which shows there may be something wrong, but which leaves doctors in difficulties as to what action to take. About 75,000 of the women are more at risk than the others and need treatment, but until now there's been no way of identifying them. The women most at risk have high levels of a virus known as the human papilloma virus. Its presence is difficult to detect, but now, using a technique known as the polymerized chain reaction, doctors can increase the amount of a certain chemical in the virus, making it easier to spot. Doctors believe 90% of women who have high levels of this virus may need more urgent help.
In the long term, I think it offers two prospects. The technique, I think, may be useful as part of the initial screening, which would minimize the great deal of labor necessary for reading screening material now. And in the much longer term, we hope that work on the papillomavirus will actually lead to a vaccine, which may completely eradicate the disease.
Cervical cancer claims about 2,000 lives a year. While the death rate amongst those over 45 has gone down in the last decade, deaths among younger women have increased. The new technique should help doctors improve the way the disease is detected and dealt with.
A leading doctor has suggested that women should consider having healthy breasts removed if they're concerned about contracting breast cancer. James Drive, a professor of obstetrics and gynecology in Leeds, said that people were far too emotional about the subject, but his suggestion has been strongly condemned by breast surgeons, who described it as unacceptable and offensive.
1 in 12 women are affected by breast cancer, 15,000 die every year. But early detection rates through mass screening of women aged over 50 have improved, and nearly 75% of women with breast cancer are now treated without major surgery. Yet despite this, a leading doctor is suggesting in tomorrow's British Medical Journal that some women are so terrified of contracting the disease, they'd be better off having their breasts removed.
What I'm saying is that society in general shouldn't look at this as an extraordinary or an eccentric or a disgraceful thing to do. It's not illogical to adopt this option.
Well, I would have thought it was quite illogical.
Well, if you think about it, the breast has done its job by the time a woman is, say, 50 years old. That's the time when breast cancer becomes increasingly common.
Cancer specialists and breast surgeons have reacted with disbelief. This surgeon says the professor is outdated and completely out of touch with women's feelings.
He's only got to sit with me in the outpatients and see the total devastation that comes to these two women who are given a diagnosis of breast cancer, when mastectomy is considered. So to suggest that mastectomy should be done to normal, healthy individuals seems to me to be absurd.
Professor Dreiff admits that surgery on demand is not practical, although he says women should have the option. But even if only high-risk women opted for breast removal, 3 out of every 4 would be doing so unnecessarily.
And that's all from the newsroom tonight. Good night.
Good evening. Customs investigators have seized cocaine imported through Liverpool docks worth an estimated £16 million. The drugs were found on a container ship which had arrived from Peru.
The cocaine, weighing 100 kilos, was shipped from Peru to the Seaforth container terminal on Merseyside. The drug was hidden in a consignment of coffee, which customs officers followed from Liverpool to a warehouse in London. 2 weeks ago, a record 935 kilos of cocaine, smuggled inside lead ingots from Venezuela, was discovered in Liverpool. Officials say the 2 seizures show Colombian cocaine barons are now using other South American countries as loading points for shipments to Europe.
Police in New Orleans say they're following a number of new leads in their search for the killer of a tourist from Greater Manchester. Julie Stott from Salford was shot in the head by a robber in the French Quarter of the city. The 27-year-old fabrics designer was on holiday with her boyfriend. He wasn't harmed in the attack. Surgeons treating a 7-year-old Manchester girl injured in the IRA bomb attack on the City of London say they're very encouraged by her progress. Sarah Sadhu has undergone 2 operations to save the sight in her left eye, and her vision is now improving steadily. Easter congregations in Preston are being asked to contribute towards the rebuilding of a church damaged by an IRA bomb last summer. The Fishergate Baptist Church required major structural repairs and the replacement of much of its stained glass following the attack on the nearby Army Recruitment Office. The church has not received any compensation for the damage caused. Sport now, and one rugby league result in the Stones Bitter Championship Division 1 game. Bradford beat Swinton 60 points to 0. Well, that's it from us tonight. Stuart Flinders will be here tomorrow afternoon at 5:20 on BBC One with a roundup of the Easter Saturday news and sport. Suzanne Charlton has the weather.
Good evening. We have a westerly wind set in now for the duration of the bank holiday weekend, really. That's bringing us a very moist area in from the Atlantic, piling up across these western coasts and hills, making it rather drizzly and misty there. In fact, even the holes we have got in the cloud are likely to fill in by the end of the night. Patchy drizzle almost anywhere, but particularly in the west. Rather more in the way of rain into Northern Ireland and parts of western Scotland by the end of a mild night. Quite windy too in the north, in fact up to gale force, perhaps even a bit stronger than that in the far north of Scotland tomorrow. This weather front sagging down close to the borders, so Northern Ireland and southern Scotland wet tomorrow morning. That rain pushing into northwest England, turning round and heading north again. But up to central and northern Scotland here, quite a bright day, a few blustery showers in the far north and rather drizzly conditions generally around these western coasts. But inland, England and Wales inland is where we'll see the cloud tending to break to give some really quite warm spells of sunshine, temperatures perhaps up to 17 and 18 degrees. Looking ahead to the bank holiday weekend, the remainder of it, a similar picture for Easter Day. The rain moving northwards though on Easter Monday. Some fine sunshine inland again, and really quite warm in the east, but by the end of Monday, rather cooler and showery weather moving in from the west. That's it from me.